42 cents. That's what it costs to buy 1 million tokens of output from one of China's top AI models. The American equivalent, OpenAI's flagship, charges $30 for the same 1 million tokens. Same job, 71 times the price. Now, you'd expect American companies to keep paying the $30. National security, data privacy, quality, pick your reason. That is not what happened. Airbnb's own CEO on the record, Alibaba's model is very good, fast, cheap. So Airbnb built on it. Cursor, one of the most popular AI coding tools in America, did something similar and didn't tell anyone. A developer found the evidence buried in an API response. In April, 2 House committees opened a formal investigation into both companies. So, here's what we're actually doing today. That 71 times number is real, but it's the widest possible version of the comparison, and I'm going to show you exactly where it holds and where it doesn't. Then the 2 companies that switched and what they're really doing, which is narrower and stranger than the headlines say. And at the end, the one finding in this whole story that genuinely worried me, that almost nobody is talking about. So let's do the number properly, because 71 times is the kind of figure that gets repeated for 2 years without anyone checking what's actually being compared. Here's where it comes from. DeepSeek's mainstream chat model charges 28 cents per million tokens going in, 42 cents coming out. OpenAI's flagship GPT 5.5 charges $5 in, $30 out. Divide output by output. 30 divided by 0.42, 71. That comparison is real. It's also not flagship against flagship. It's DeepSeek's everyday model against OpenAI's single most expensive one, the widest pairing available on both sides. Here's where it narrows. Compare against OpenAI's cheapest tier instead, and the gap shrinks hard, $1.25 per million tokens out. Google's cheapest, $1.50. Against those, DeepSeek is 3 to 4 times cheaper. Still a real gap, nowhere near 71. So, what's the honest headline number? RAM, the corporate spend platform tracking real transactions across more than 50,000 companies, puts it at 60 to 80% below frontier US software providers for comparable quality. That's the figure I'd actually defend, not the near total gap 71 times implies. RAM's chief economist, Ara Karazian, put it plainly. Some companies are willing to use cheaper Chinese models. DeepSeek was RAM's #1 trending software vendor as of June. One wrinkle almost nobody mentions. Alibaba's own price list charges 60 to 70% less for the mainland China endpoint of its model than for the international one. The version that sends your data to China is the cheaper version. Alibaba prices it that way themselves. So the incentive is not subtle, and it's not a rounding error. Which brings us to the 2 American companies that acted on it. Airbnb is the clearest case because the CEO said it out loud himself. Brian Chesky, Airbnb's co-founder, on the record last October. Alibaba's Qwen model was very good, fast, and cheap. ChatGPT, he said, wasn't quite ready for what they needed at the time. Airbnb's customer service system runs on 13 different AI models in total. OpenAI, Google, Alibaba, others. But by Chesky's own account, Qwen is one it relies on heavily. Airbnb's own claim. Across its whole AI rollout, not Qwen alone, the company cut average resolution time on service issues from almost 3 hours down to about 6 seconds. That's Airbnb's number about its own product, not independently verified, worth saying out loud. Then, April 29th of this year, the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party and the House Homeland Security Committee jointly opened an investigation, not a press cycle, an actual congressional letter naming Airbnb directly. Committee Chairman John Moulinar. The AI models these companies use are trained by China's censorship regime and introduce hidden vulnerabilities that put Americans' data and businesses at risk. 3 weeks later, Chesky responds publicly on the record. We are not providing data to any Chinese companies. They don't have access to any data. He called the criticism a misunderstanding of how the technology actually works. Both of those statements can be true at the same time. Whether they are comes down to a distinction, the next part of this video explains, and we'll get to it. But first, there's a second American company named in that same letter, and nobody was supposed to find out about that one at all. Now, the stranger case, Cursor. Cursor is one of the most popular AI coding assistants in the US, made by a company called Anysphere. Earlier this year, they launched a new model called Composer 2, marketed as beating OpenAI's and Anthropic's coding models at a fraction of the cost. What they didn't put in the launch post, whose model it was actually built on. A developer found out anyway. Buried in a raw API response was a model ID that wasn't theirs, Kimi, from Moonshot AI's open-weight model, a company based in Beijing. It shouldn't have been visible at all. Cursor's own co-founder, Aman Sanger, admitted it afterward. It was a mistake not to specify it was Kimi-based from the start. A VP later put a number on it. Roughly a quarter of Composer 2's technical foundation traces back to Moonshot's model, fine-tuned on top with Cursor's own work. Moonshot AI confirmed it too, calling it an authorized commercial partnership, served notably through Fireworks AI, a US-based hosting company, not a direct line to a server in Beijing. And Cursor's parent company, Anysphere, is the second name in that same April congressional letter, right alongside Airbnb. Two companies, two different discoveries, one volunteered by its own CEO, one caught by a stranger reading API headers. Same underlying story either way. Here's the distinction that actually decides who's right in that argument between Chesky and Congress. Almost no coverage of this story explains it, and it's the whole ball game. There are two completely different things people mean when they say running on Chinese AI. One, you download the model's open weights, the actual trained file, and run it yourself on your own servers or a US cloud partners. Nothing has to leave US controlled infrastructure. That's what Airbnb appears to be doing with Qwen and what Cursor did with Kimi through Fireworks AI, a US host. This is why Chesky can say accurately they don't have access to any data. Under this setup, that's true. 2. You send your prompts directly to a Chinese company's own servers through their API the same way you'd call OpenAI's. That's a live pipe. Ramp's transaction data shows this actually happening, but only at 0.1 to 0.3% of the companies they track. Real. Just not biggest companies in America. Real. So Chesky's defense holds up on the narrow question of where the data physically goes. But here's the committee's actual counter-argument. And it's not nothing. They're not worried about data in transit. They're worried about what's baked into the model weights themselves. Training data nobody outside the company can audit, and the possibility of behavior quietly shaped by whoever built it. That's a real unresolved question. Nobody has fully answered it yet on either side. We're not going to pretend otherwise. There's a reason none of this surprised the people who were paying attention 18 months ago. There was a moment when the whole world noticed China's AI progress at once, and it produced the most repeated number in this entire story. It also happens to be wrong in the way this channel exists to catch. January 27th, 2025. Nvidia loses roughly $589 billion of market value in a single day. The biggest one-day loss for any company in US corporate history. The trigger? DeepSeek released its R1 model built on top of its earlier V3 model and claimed V3 was trained for almost nothing. The number everyone repeated, $5.6 million to build a frontier AI model. That number is real. DeepSeek published it themselves, but it only ever covered one thing, the compute cost of V3's final training run, using about 2,000 chips. Not the research, not the failed runs, not the hardware. What's actually behind it? Google DeepMind's CEO Demis Hassabis called the framing exaggerated and a little bit misleading. DeepSeek, he said, seems to have only reported the cost of the final training round, which is a fraction of the total cost. The research firm SemiAnalysis went and estimated the real figure, roughly $1.6 billion in infrastructure and access to something like 50,000 NVIDIA-class chips, same league as the big American labs. Not a scrappy underdog with 2,000 chips in a garage. 5.6 million is a real receipt. It's just a receipt for one small line of the bill. The real infrastructure spend is closer to 300 times bigger, and the small number is the one that moved $500 billion of market value in an afternoon. So the price gap is real. The origin story around it was inflated, both things at once. So, is it actually good or just cheap? That matters, because cheap and worse is a very different story than cheap and competitive. And it's worth saying, the model that's this cheap and the model that ranks highest aren't necessarily the same release. These labs ship new versions constantly. So, judge the lineage, not one single checkpoint. Skip the vendor's own benchmark claims. Every lab grades its own homework. Go to Marina instead. Blind testing. Real humans comparing outputs with no idea which model made which answer. Generally treated as the most credible independent leaderboard that exists. As of June 2026, DeepSeek's top-ranked model sits roughly 55 points off the single best closed model on that leaderboard. Approximately this moves month to month, closing, not closed, and broken down by category. It's not one country simply behind the other. DeepSeek's model leads on math and on pure value for cost. Qwen is strong on multilingual tasks. Kimi leads specifically on huge million token pieces of Chinese language content. The single best all-around model is still American, but still American and not competitive are two very different claims, and only one of them is still true. That's the part the January 2025 panic got structurally right, even if the specific numbers it panicked over were shaky. The underlying gap really was closing. It just kept closing quietly for another year and a half while most of the coverage moved on. Here's the part of this story that gets the least attention and honestly should get the most. Everyone talks about censorship. It's real. Researchers at PromptFu found more than 1,100 prompts on sensitive topics get refused by DeepSeek, including anything about Tiananmen Square, and its answers on Taiwan lean pro-Beijing rather than neutral. True. But here's the honest complication. Analysts at ChinaFile point out that most businesses aren't asking their AI about Tiananmen Square. They're asking it where a customer's order is. Censorship on politics mostly doesn't touch what companies actually use these models for. This is the part that does. Booz Allen Hamilton, the consulting firm, ran a study published in May 2026. Over 2,800 trials across 5 AI coding models, 4 Chinese, 1 American, generating something like 460,000 lines of code. They told each model in the prompt that the person asking worked for a US government contractor and compared what came out against a neutral prompt. 3 of the 4 Chinese models wrote measurably less secure code the moment the prompt said US government contractor. Qwen's coding model was the worst of them, about 130% more vulnerabilities under that persona. The one American model tested the same way. Anthropic's Claude went the opposite direction. More secure code for the government flagged prompt, not less. One model isn't a real control group, and I'd want this independently replicated before treating it as settled. But think about what it would mean if it holds. A contractor's engineer, using one of these tools to ship an internal government tool, ships a security flaw the model put there because of who it thought was asking. Nobody's putting that finding on a t-shirt. It should probably be the headline. So, is Chinese AI 71 times cheaper than American AI? No, not as a general rule. That number is real for one specific comparison, the widest one available, and the honest defensible version is 60 to 80% below frontier US pricing. Still a real gap, just not the number in the cold open. Is that gap large enough that American companies moved anyway? Demonstrably yes. Two named American companies, Airbnb and Cursor, are running Chinese-built AI models in production right now, confirmed by their own people. One volunteered by its CEO, one caught by a stranger reading API headers. Both are under a real ongoing congressional investigation for it. And the part that actually matters isn't where your data travels. Both companies make a real case that it doesn't leave US-controlled infrastructure. It's what's sitting inside the model weights themselves. A question nobody outside these companies can fully audit yet on either side. That question isn't closed. As of this week, Moonshot AI, the company behind Cursor's Kimi model, is in a brand new fight. The White House's own tech policy director is accusing them of running banned chips through intermediary countries and of distilling a competitor's model to build their newest one. Moonshot denies it. Nobody outside the room actually knows yet. That thread is still live, and when it resolves, it's worth coming back to. This channel exists to check the number and the story before it goes in the headline. If you learned something you'll actually use the next time this comes up in a meeting, that's the whole job. Subscribe for the next one.